I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Anyway, our next guest, among many other things, is I consider a comrade and a friend, and is certainly a supporter of BPM. He's been interviewed on this platform before, so we're happy to have him back. He does a lot. He's heavily engaged with activist struggle, with political prisoners, and a number of different ventures off campus that are very important. He is also the current president of the American Studies Association and professor in the Department of Media and Cultural Studies at the University of California, Riverside. And of course, I'm talking about our next guest, Professor Dylan Rodriguez. It's a pleasure. Thank you for getting up early with us and joining us.
Nobody wants to go to Harvard. Nobody wants to go to
Harvard. Nope, maybe nobody here. Nobody here. They're all fighting either getting the University of California system or over to Morgan.
I don't know about that either, my friend.
Or maybe to Hampton.
I'm not even sure. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, no, I don't know about that either. But yeah,
I've grown very cynical about university administrations, even more than I used to be.
Well, I mean, it's hard not to. The more you stay engaged, and the more, well, I should say, I'll speak for myself. The more I stay engaged, the more I pay attention. It's hard not to. You know, but rather than risk further marginalization at my own institution, let me just move on.
Yes, sir.
I had a question real quick.
Go ahead.
I remember that California's state system used to be relatively inexpensive. Is that still the case?
Oh man, how much time do you have about this? All right, so back in the day when the demographic of students that attended we're talking about the University of California now. There's UC and there's Cal State, but so I know the most about the UC system because I've been in it now for such a long time as a student and as a faculty member. But back in the day, which is as recently as 25 years ago, when the UC system was still struggling with being an overwhelmingly white and privileged Asian American demographic, what they called fees were extraordinarily public, right? Meaning that you were paying $500, maybe $1,000 a year to attend. And even then people were pissed, right? Because the whole so-called California master plan said that this public education, higher education should be available tuition free, which is by the way, that's why they call them fees. That's why the UC regents call them fees. They don't call it tuition. We call it tuition. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's some coincidence of history, but most likely it is not. Most likely it's embedded institutional, white supremacy and anti-blackness and all the rest of that the more diverse the undergrad population became, the higher the fees became, to the point where now it's an expensive setup. And they try to set up these different ways of trying to offset student debt burdens and things like that. Except what ends up happening is that these Black, brown, working class students that are caught somewhere in the middle end up just bearing these fees, and it shouldn't even be in the conversation, right? So it's a nice 21st century reflection of how what we used to call institutionalized racism actually happens. Is that the Blacker, the browner, the more working class the population gets, conditions at my campus deteriorate, meaning the physical built environment deteriorates. Meanwhile, what they call fees, what we call tuition, inclines. Right. At the same time, they set up all these reform measures to try to offset the climbing tuition, to mitigate some of the protests and the outrage and all the rest of that. So it's a mess, Brother Cobbler. It is a mess.
I'm pretty sure it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, and that was an accident. Yes. Yeah.
And I just saw an article too that the California system is now, they just had some graduates who were people who were in prison, most of them Black and brown. And so they're actually giving them an opportunity to get an education. So if you want to get an education, just commit a felony, and then you can.
Underground Scholars Initiative. Underground Scholars Initiative popped up at Berkeley. I'm the faculty co-mentor of the chapter at UC Riverside, actually. Mm-hmm. And that group they're always trying to navigate how the UC administration wants to construct this Horatio Alger bootstrap, up by their bootstraps kind of, mm-hmm. Booker T. Washington, like whatever narrative. They want to construct this narrative around them. And a lot of the students that are actually in USI, they don't fit that narrative. They bust their butt. Don't get me wrong. They're hardest working, smartest people I know. But they resent the narrative. resent the narrative. So there's a constant tension between the lived reality of students and underground scholars and the way the UC Regents administration tend to want to depict them as this, lovely story of carceral rehabilitation and whatnot. Which, some of these students are actually abolitionists, right? Some of these USI students, they're abolitionists or they're proto-abolition. You know what I mean? Like they're not trying to assimilate, into this petty bourgeois narrative of middle class ascension from being incarcerated and whatnot. So yeah, this is where I am, y'all.
Look at that
I'm from Jared's area. I'm from the DMV.
You messed up the warm and fuzzy feeling that I had from reading the stuff that I read in the mainstream. So I appreciate that.
That's my job.
That was a vicious segue, by the way, to what I know we're here to talk about this morning. So that was very well done. But to mess that up, I did want to go back and remind folks, because I didn't in the introduction, that Dylan is also the author of this White Reconstruction, Domestic Warfare and the Logics of Genocide, a book that I continue to thoroughly enjoy and work my way through. And one of the many that I admittedly have not read in its entirety, because apparently that's how I do things these days.
And I'll shoot you the Cliff's Notes version in an email or something.
Hey, I mean, no, it's good. That, I don't mind reading in slow motion. I mean, but
that's how we should read. That's how we should read.
I got
should read slow.
It's slow motion with like a 30 book rotation in slow motion. So
right on.
That's the problem.
Right that's the problem. But the Cliff Notes, I think, as a shameless plug, people can get in our interview when they go back and check that out. The full discussion we had of the book can serve as the Cliff Notes for everybody until we all finish reading the book. But initially I invited you and Dr. Joy James, who is just permanently invited to talk about something I saw that seems new to me. So I'm happy to be corrected on this. I did reach out to. Okay, it's good. New. I did reach out to the folks at Critical Resistance. But we hear from who we hear from in the order we hear from them. So we're welcome. They're welcome. We can have this conversation over and over again, or in different ways going forward. But new to me, or newly published, is this resource guide for teaching and learning abolition, in which I saw that you and Professor James have contributions included. And just quickly, it says here that this is a resource. That this resource guide frames this moment as part of the long history of abolitionist movements, and it offers a framework for analyzing the structures of domination that constitute the carceral state and give rise to the prison industrial complex. So if I wanted you to talk a little bit about what this is, and maybe even to start with how you all, or Critical Resistance, define abolition and abolitionism, because I know that that's sometimes a hotly contested concept. But anyway, man,
that's a great question, and that's the one we should be asking all the time in a real way, right? Is questions of definition, especially around these key terms that we're using. So yeah, I want to talk about that for sure. Quick correction. I'm past president of the American Studies Association now. I just gave my belated presidential address on Monday. I'll send you the link.
Oh yeah, my bad. Well, congratulations on your tenure, your time served. Shoot. However it's however you.
Until it got canceled, Professor Ball over here was actually on one of the committees. We were supposed to have that conference in Baltimore last year, and Jared was supposed to put together a battling DJs effort.
We were about to do it, a DC Baltimore rivals. But so by the way, you have, just revealed the real conspiracy behind COVID.
That is, man.
That was the whole point of this so-called pandemic, was to get us to shut down Jared's DMV DJ.
They always hating, man.
We're always
hating on you.
Listen though, we're running it back. I think in 3 years, maybe 4 years. I can't remember. The conference coming back to Baltimore, so I'm gonna make sure that you and I are in the mix.
And well, real quick though, I want to shout you out. I like to shout out people who do this work that don't get credit for this, because not all colleagues, not all in academia do this kind of thing. You looked out for me. You were very supportive as president of the ASA. I really appreciate that with the Freedom Schools project and
Yeah.
letting me participate and being involved. So I appreciate all of that. Good looking out. I really appreciate
Hey, that's
that.
what we're supposed to do. I didn't do you any favors. You did me a favor being, jumping in on that. So
Okay,
hey, by the way,
enough.
that's part of the definition of abolition. To me, it's you talk about permanent invitations, right? To me, that's part of the definition. It's a generous, permanent invitation to a party, to a uprising, to a revolt, to some rage and joy. Like that's part of the definition of it. So
right on.
So I'll say that as far as this resource guide goes, this was a couple years of weekly work. So shout out to Shana Agid, Melissa Birch, Priya Kandaswamy, Erica Miners, Setu Shigematsu, the group of us. We met every week thinking through this, co-writing it, curating it in a painstaking way, trying to frame it in the right way. I want folks who take a look at this thing to understand it is by no means intended to be definitive or finished. It's more of a catalyst. That's how I think I always saw. I think how the group of us always saw it, and we're the group that we're part of what's called critical resistance abolitionist educators. So we're people who have day jobs as teachers, professors, and so forth, researchers, professional scholar types. So we thought we could weaponize our expertise a little bit. Maybe put to work for other constituents of, other publics, other communities of people, the labor that we put out there building curricula over the years, but also probably much more importantly, because there's tons of syllabi out there. There's tons of book lists and article lists and film lists out there. There's millions of them, feels like. So what we thought we could contribute was actually a framing that maybe challenges what seems to be some of the emerging left, what you maybe could think about as like a left common sense or a set of left presumptions that we think are insufficient, potentially dangerous, and are attached to some really prominent texts that have some problems to them. They deserve credit for popularizing a certain language and a certain critical perspective, but they got some problem. And so people need to enrich their understanding of what's going on and go to the source, go to the archive, look at this stuff. And by the way, when you look at this resource guide, there are all different kinds of text in here: book length stuff, short stuff, poetry, film, whatever you like, use it. And we tried to link to as many things as possible that you can just access for free online and that kind of thing. So that's the origins of this thing. We spent some time working on it, and it's free. Y'all just download it. There's a couple teaching tools that are attached to it. If folks want to do, teaching type things, if they want to do in the classroom kind of things, we want to do community organization type things to just think and talk about abolition as a way to break out of their current ways of thinking about constant reform that ends up reinforcing the very institutions that terrorize and kill people. So that's what pushed this forward. And we can talk about the definition of abolition.
Well, I do want to come back to that, but I have to, since you laid it out this way, I have to admit, and you're smart enough to sidestep my pettiness as you need to, but I could not help but enjoy the very professional and appropriate way that you hate on, or I perceive you as hating on two texts that I hate on tremendously and have hated on for. So, because you talk about the importance, because you have a section here where you say, why another resource list?
Yeah.
And then, as you said, look, this issue of framing is important because, as you point out, or as I'm projecting my bias, you point out that the new Jim Crow, from Michelle Alexander and Ava DuVernay's The 13th are prominent texts that address issues of incarceration. But as I've pointed out, and it did not go well in my instances in doing this, admittedly, and some personal feelings got hurt, some friendships got interrupted, all kinds of stuff happened. But I felt that those two texts in particular presented a very dangerous frame on these issues, and the way that they were being carried, the way that their frames are being carried into public discourse beyond the text themselves, I thought continues to be very dangerous. So when I saw that you mentioned them in this piece here, I was very excited. It was, so I was like, yeah. Anyway,
go ahead. No, I'm not going to. There's no reason to sidestep. We put it front and center in the framing of this project, and like I said, it on the one hand, you don't want to just be petty and hating on text, because people, they put this out there. It's an attempt to contribute something to the world. At the very same time, the thing that gets me about both of those texts is that there's an almost complete erasure, for example, of the recent and long archive of abolitionist Black feminists, right? So we're talking about two Black women, intellectual, scholar, cultural, producers, artists, and whatnot, right? That put these things out there. They're trying to contribute something, and it's just not well informed. It's not well informed. You look at who was talked to in the documentary, and shit, man, fucking
Dylan,
Van Jones is in it. Van Jones is in it.
Van
Jones is in it.
I was going to say, you said Van Jones. I was going to say the Koch brothers are in there.
Come on now.
Their views.
Come on now. Hey, you know how I started my class the other day? I'm teaching a course on prison industrial complex right now, and I had the students spend 2 classes analyzing Trump's First Step Act, right? And you know how I opened up that discussion? I showed them the photo, the famous, to me, the infamous photo of Trump signing the First Step Act and then turning around and handing his Sharpie to Van Jones behind him as Van Jones is grinning at him, right? And that's who you're going to interview. That's who you're going to interview for a film 13th about the continuities of carceral slavery and potentially abolition. Here's the other thing that happens in both the texts. It's as if abolitionist struggle never existed, right? And in fact, I'll say something about Michelle, because I was on a panel with her once. She's cool. I like her. You know what I mean? Like, I think she's open to these discussions. In fact, we sort of started having one back when her book first came out. I'm going to give her credit for a minute because I think she's moved.
Yeah, I've heard
since
that.
Since the publication of this book 10 years ago, I'll say Michelle Alexander has shown movement. And I always hesitate to characterize people in some kind of political category, but I will say she's moved. She's been reflective. She's kind of even started calling herself abolitionist in certain kinds of ways. So I'll give her credit for that. I would dare say that if she were to revisit and redo that book, or rethink that book today, it would probably be different. It would probably be informed by different people, by different archives, by different,
but it wouldn't sell as well.
That's probably for sure. That's probably for sure. Things that significantly exceed or destroy liberal frameworks are probably not going to be taken up and marketed quite as well as the things that kind of concede to a certain liberal, progressive, in this case, old, kind of an old school in a way, civil rights framework, right? Like, it appeals to a certain crowd, a certain sensibility that frankly is part of, U.S. anti-Black national culture. It's part of what domesticates and tries to neutralize Black radicalism and abolitionist struggle, for that matter, anti-colonial struggle, all the rest of that stuff. So that's what animates this resource list is how can we provide people some tools so we're not constantly having to respond to the inadequate and dangerous misframings and mistheorizations and poor information that is generated by some of these dominant texts. So yeah, that's what you see here, y'all. Like, and again, it's not intended to be definitive. This is supposed to be catalyzing. And the other thing I'll just quickly say that I think is important, if you even just went through the group of us in critical resistance abolitionist educators, if you asked us to define abolition, you're going to get multiple definitions, right? You'll get some principled agreement on certain things, right? That we think policing and incarceration should be gone, right? Those things need to be just abolished. And then from there, it becomes a really generative discussion and debate. That's what the resource guides also intended to do. It's to provide people the tools to actually have informed conversations and debates about this thing we're calling abolition as a practice, not just as, this kind of unrealistic future that's somewhere down the line. Not at all. To the contrary. What we want people to think about is how is abolition part of a historical practice? How does it frame the way you do things, the way you rage, the way you joy, the way you build community? How does it build organizing methods? How can it build, something into what you do every day? You don't have to go and necessarily do something totally different. You can think as an abolitionist in what you do every day, and that's what this is intended to provide. And I have these interactions with people all the time now, who will say that just thinking through and talking through some of these histories, some of these concepts, some of these ideas, some of these struggles actually just helps them rethink their everyday lives, right? They don't feel like they need to go and do something exotic and elsewhere. They can actually think as an abolitionist and work as an abolitionist here and now in what they do. So this is intended to provoke that and to inform that. So And I'll say my obsession, and I don't apologize for it, is I think we have to stop using the framework of mass incarceration and the rhetoric of mass incarceration, because I think it's a liberal framework. And I think it sneaks a certain kind of white humanism and white multicultural humanism in through the back door, through its very rhetoric. Because this thing has never been about mass incarceration. It's always been about warfare. It's always been about asymmetrical warfare. It's always been about targeted incarceration. So that's my thing. That's what I think we need to do here is provide people some tools to use more accurate language, more creative language, and also just a deeper analysis, because you don't get anywhere without a deeper analysis, right? You got to have a common, shared, collectively generated analysis. This stuff here provides the tools for that. And again, the different texts don't necessarily agree with each other either. So this is not some kind of sectarian move either, where we're trying to like line people up into some kind of cult. No, it's to the contrary. It's an invitation. It's an invitation into a way of thinking and doing stuff together.
Well,
and also we got to burn the fucking plantation down. I mean, that's what this comes down to, right? Like we can't abstract abolition from that desire and that tradition. It's about burning down the plantation.
Well, I was going to actually ask what your recommendations were for us to get rid of that, but I mean, in one or two sentences, you already answered the question. So I'll just cede to brother Dr. Ball.
Well, all I was going to say is I don't know. I first of all, I appreciate seeing Sophia Bakari's book at the top there, and I and then I also appreciate looking through the list that at least 80% of that list I have not read. So
that was on purpose. Yeah,
I have to appreciate that. But there is something that's not on that list that I have to recommend in addition to that
this was
list.
Coming. All right, I'm taking notes. Go
there's
ahead.
There's only one that jumps out that immediately jumps out because it comes from it was
this is good.
But Greg Thomas is why some like the new Jim Crow so much, which I don't know where else it is. He gave it to me years ago to publish at imixwhatilike.org. So
I need to find this.
It is at imixwhatilike.org. It is one of the best critiques of that book. It comes with a study guide and a set of questions. I'll include the link when we put this clip up in the show notes.
Beautiful.
And just to show you how wonderfully principled I am, Greg don't even mess with me anymore. Like, dude don't even talk to me no more. Like, so like personally, he's got no room for your man. But the work is so strong. And in fact,
what'd you say to him?
What'd you do? That's what we already know.
I don't know.
Forget the critique. We want to know what you did.
I'll tell you. And I invite anyone. I always say, whenever I tell people publicly or privately my version of what happened with somebody, go get theirs if they'll give it to you. But and as I told him on a number of occasions, because I sort of I don't know, I broke his rules once or twice before, and in one case he was telling me what I had done wrong, and I told him, look, man, you too smart for me. I don't even understand your critique of my behavior. Like, I don't even understand what you're saying. So it may just be that it's over my head. But in this instance, what was funny, because they all came around it. So when I was still with PFW, shout out to WPFW, Katia Stitt, we were in Pledge Drive. Brother Kaba, I know you know and understand this well. We were in Pledge Drive. And Katia specifically asked that we use the new Jim Crow as a book for fundraising.
A thank you gift. Yeah.
A thank you gift.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a team player. At the same time, I had Sister Dominique Stevenson, who partnered with Eddie Conway, prison abolitionist herself, and Greg were coming on. And I told before the show, I said, look, here's the uncomfortable situation. I want to talk with Greg about his critique of the new Jim Crow. Dominique had one as well, but we have to use it for the pledge drive. So the way I was going to try to frame it is, you're going to hear our critique of the book, but then get the book to support the station that would offer this critique, and then judge for yourself. So that was the frame. So like, we're not saying don't get the book, don't support the station. No, support the station, get the book, but here's the critique. After the fact, Greg was not happy. And essentially what I remember was that Greg's argument was that including him in a critique, including his critique in a discussion that was also promoting that people get the book, put him in a contradictory position that he didn't want to be in. And I was trying to just say, one, we talked about it in advance of the show, so it wasn't a surprise. And two, this is the contradictory spaces that we deal with when we're in organizational spaces, public radio spaces. So I was just like, but
But are
that
we
was
boycotting the book? I mean, that's part of this, right? Is like, is there a boycott? No, it's like anyway. Like this, we can have that conversation.
But my point is what
Yeah.
he now
You
I
are a
invite people.
habitual line stepper. That's the point.
I
You're a
am,
habitual
but I
line
invite
stepper. That's the
people.
problem.
But my point is, to me, Greg's analysis to me is usually so strong, and I think his intellect does surpass my own. I'm not always able to keep up with him. So it may not even be that I'm doing his criticism of me justice. I'm just saying the point is he don't mess with me anymore. I even reached out to an elder that we know in common, and as out of respect to this elder's advice, I even apologized. I reached out to Greg and apologized, which was difficult in and of itself. Considered I was like, man, I didn't really think I did that much wrong, and I definitely deserve all this. And Greg didn't respond. So like, Greg don't mess with me. But my point is, his work is I think, even though we disagree on Afro-pessimism, but his work is definitely brilliant and should be on the table. And I think his criticism of the new Jim Crow is fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen it.
So
I've seen
anyway,
it
I would encourage people to check that out as well, because it does a lot of what I think you're doing with the guide. That it reframes, it includes the radical traditions that the new Jim Crow ignores. It encourages, through a study guide and questions, people to develop and go on, and it includes the perspectives of political prisoners, etc. So anyway, so
I mean, you were talking just the way you were talking about this tension, this beef that apparently exists between you and someone else, right? Mm-hmm. Two smart people, both working within Black radical tradition, whatnot. Like, so that makes me think about another thing that I think characterizes what we're trying to do, what the group of us are trying to do with this guide, was that we started working on this and kind of in the middle of it, global Black revolt happens, and so we start developing right around that period of time and realizing like this has to reflect that longer history. So shit doesn't fall back into the constant narrative that like Black insurgency just kind of happened, like Watts just kind of happened, LA just kind of happened, June 2020 just kind of happened, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor just kind of happened, right? But to point it out, like this is part of a long history of insurgency, revolt, and also of organizing, of planning, of speculation, of art, all that stuff, right? And it's linked, if it's not directly an expression of the abolitionist genealogy or tradition or archive, it's definitely in dialogue with it. And you saw that last summer. You saw abolitionist language popping off everywhere. Like, I'm talking about if you were in a rally, if you were in the street. Like, I went downtown, my family and I, we all showed up in downtown Riverside on that day where the whole world was in the street. I've never seen anything remotely like it in Riverside, right? Like, it was a takeover of the city. And it was lovely. It was just lovely. It was loud. It was noisy. And it was both chaotic and orderly at the same time and all that stuff. But here's the thing. You're talking about beef, right? My beef, this is me now. My beef is with academics who have attached themselves to abolition as a kind of academic identity over the last year and a half, because it's lucrative, because they think it wins them some kind of actual financial traction, maybe some professional traction, why not, who have no connection to communities of people with whom they can share the responsibility of trying to do the work of abolition. That's my beef. And they know who they are. Y'all know who you are if you happen to watch this segment, right? And this is, I'm both scolding you. I'm not talking about you two. I'm scolding y'all that do this, you academics that do this, and I'm also inviting you to actually get engaged with us, right? Like, join, because you are probably right next to a community of people, even if it's students, even if it's your staff, maybe a couple of your other colleagues, right? Like, there's people who are actually doing the work in a collective manner, and that's who you need to be in collective responsibility with. I used to use the word accountability. I don't use that word anymore. My thinking got shifted on this by Amika Tendahi, the co-founder of Ujima Medics. I don't know how to put links in the chat, so maybe y'all can do it. But I had this long conversation with her not that long ago, and she was saying, I don't use the word collective accountability, shared accountability. She said I use the word deep responsibility, because that's what Ujima Medics does over there in Southside Chicago. So I've started using that term. So this is the thing. This is the beef I have is with opportunistic people who use abolitionists like a neoliberal identity term. You know, they just kind of name themselves that with no sense of deep shared responsibility. So that's the other thing this is coming from. People that are down or trying to get down with this thing we're calling abolition. Here's some tools. Here's some tools that exemplify how that happens. It's also a set of tools, obviously, that provide some analysis, some ideas, and some frameworks. And what it allows you to do now is utilize your skill set, because that's one of the things that I've learned over the years is that you don't necessarily have to go and learn other skill sets, although it's highly recommended. Like, we should all try to figure out other skill sets, right? At the same time, you can draw from your existing fluencies. And like I said at the start of our conversation, you can weaponize that shit. Weaponize that shit for abolition. Weaponize that shit for Black radicalism and Black liberation. Weaponize that shit for decolonization and anti-colonialism. That's
so just real quick, is where is defund the police in
okay.
Conjunction with
okay, so I'm just gonna mirror that question back, right? And I'm saying that is the question, because so there's multiple answers to that question, of course, because some have taken defund the police as an opportunity to refund the police, right? And the way this is happening, University of California, the perfect example is, I just talked about this in my American Studies Association presidential speech as an example, and I'm probably gonna get like probably any raise I was gonna get one day is gone now. But this is in a sense what happens in all these different institutions, is that there's a response to what is an abolitionist or proto-abolitionist revolt and demand: defund the police, right? And people are saying what we actually want is a redistribution of infrastructure to things which are decarceral, which are the opposite of police power, which, you know, empower collective forms of safety and care, which, you know, create infrastructure for health and, you know, address people's food and housing insecurity. Whatever. That's what people are kind of saying in the best iterations of defund the police. Then when institutions like universities, city councils, police departments, etc., they absorb that shit, right? And as we've learned, once that stuff gets absorbed, some white magic happens, right? And what they do is they first of all, they gain an expertise and fluency in the language, right, of defund the police. They understand and study the frameworks that people are saying when they put out defund the police, and then they bureaucratize it in such a way, and the white magic that's being performed, they bureaucratize in such a way that they can then turn back to you and say, look, we defunded the police. What we're doing now is, rather than hiring a new officer to replace that one that retired, we're going to put the money over here with social workers, right, who at the same time are going to be directly reporting to the police, right? So now we're satisfying your demand, right? Because now social workers, rather than cops, are responding to, you know, to mental health crises situations, right? But at the very same time, part of the bureaucratization and infrastructure of it is that these folks are essentially deputized as extensions of the police. So what you've actually done is you've expanded police power, right? Under the guise of defunding the police, you've actually multiplied the tentacles through which police power expresses itself. And then oftentimes the folks don't fully understand what I'm talking about, like the folks who have been deputized, they don't fully understand that as what it is, right? And some will actually praise it and say, look, we're actually doing the work now, right? They'll sometimes say, we are actually doing the work of abolition, right? And the point is like, folks don't adequately analyze what it means to be deputized with police power, because all that does is amplify what is already there, which is anti-Black war in most cases, right? War against people who are disabled, right? War against people who are displaced and unhoused. I mean, that's because, as we know, those logics of war replicate themselves in social work, right? So all that's happening now is that you've multiplied police power so that social workers, who are human beings like the rest of us, right? We're all shit. We're all human, right? And so we replicate these logics and ideologies of domination and violence all the time in our daily lives, unless we are in communities that are trying to transform that, right? So for the most part, what's happening is that all the anti-Blackness and coloniality of the police is already there in the social welfare apparatus, right? In the social work apparatus, I should say. And so what do you think is going to happen when you deputize social workers, you know, as part of a defunding. So there's that thing that's happening. And by the way, this is the moment we're going to be in for the foreseeable future, is this kind of shit, right? Like periodically aggressive reform, probably mostly modest reform that may well draw from the rhetorical apparatus of things like defund the police, to dissipate, to neutralize, to domesticate, to kind of rein back into liberalism, what are in fact insurgent abolitionist tendencies, if not actual abolitionist agendas. So our job is to fuck that all up constantly. On the one hand, like we need to disorder that, and then also study. We need to be engaged in all forms of collective study, whatever that. This is what we're doing today, right? Even though I'm talking too much, like this is what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to do collective study right now, right? This guide thing that we're talking about, that's part of trying to catalyze collective study, whatever form that takes. So that's our job, I think.
The only issue, you're not talking too much. The only issue, frankly, for me is that I'm now 4 minutes late. I have my daughters are off school today, and I have a documentary date with my oldest that I'm now 4 minutes late for. So I got to go.
Blame me. It's my bad.
No. This is all good. I will put a link. We will include a link to criticalresistance.org just in general. We will also link directly to this guide and toolkit in the show notes as well, and to our previous interview with Professor Rodriguez, and encourage people to get his great book, White Deconstruction, where we can learn more about the white magic that he is deconstructing there. But Brother Kaba, thank you for again joining and co-hosting again today. And
hey, good to meet you, man. This is I think our first time. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, right on.
As always, Jared.
Yeah.
No, and we definitely want to do more and have you and more of your crew on as well. And anyway, shout out to Joy James as well. And everybody in the audience who's here live and those who will see this later, we really appreciate you. And as Fred used to say, Fred Hampton to you, we say peace because we know you'll fight for it. So thanks again, everybody. And we'll catch you next time on That Mix What I Like and throughout the Black Power Media universe. So peace, everybody. Peace. Take care. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.